Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 166 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined, as always, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans, if there are any left.
Yes, if you haven't abandoned the sport of college football after the travesty of this weekend.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, we are a father-son duo here to talk about our favorite team, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, but mostly this episode it's going to be national discussions. We'll be discussing the 5 conference championship games. But before we dive into that, we got to get a little lubricated here, so we're going to crack open some cold beverages. I'm changing up a little this week. I've got my Kona Brewing Company Longboard Island Lager.
Okay. Well, good for you. I was getting tired of you, drinking the Japanese beer every week. So good for you. I'm happy for you.
Well, thanks.
And I'm going to change it up this week too. I am drinking from a local company brewery in northern Michigan by the name of Shorts Brewing Company, which many people might know because it's a very successful brewer out of Bel Air, Michigan, home of the Bel Air Brown and many other great beers. But I'm drinking one of their basic beers that was initially made just for the local people in Bel Air, Michigan, and it was referred to as Locals Light. And it's a great beer for summer drinking, and your mom is a big fan. It's just an American lager called Locals Light is the name. So cheers for the local Michigan beer brewery.
All right.
Here we go.
Cheers. All righty.
All right.
So we're going to kick things off this week doing a short bit on Nebraska football and Nebraska volleyball because, of course, the girls are in the NCAA tournament now. But on the football side of things, Nebraska fans did get some good news, which is that Tony White, our defensive coordinator, officially renewed his contract with the university. There were some rumors that he was in consideration for the USC defensive coordinator job. But apparently they've decided to go with someone else. I don't think it's been officially announced yet, but sounds like he's staying, which is obviously good news for us because his defense was the highlight of our whole season.
Right. Well, and you know what? We need stability. I think that, something that we've talked about occasionally, but probably not often enough over the years that we've been doing this podcast, Alex. And I know that we talked about it quite a bit, just you and I, at various times talking Nebraska football specific, that one of the things that has been our worst weakness over the last 2 decades has been instability, just not having consistency in your coaching staff, whether it's year-to-year assistant coaching changes or whether it's the wholesale changes that happen pretty much every time you change head coaches, which we've been in that basically that grinder for 20 years. And so, having Tony stay, even though I think we all know collectively that if he continues to do well and therefore we maybe improve, that Tony's not long for the Nebraska staff because somebody's going to come along and give him a head coaching job. But I think this experience teaches us that Tony was smart enough to recognize that he had a good situation coaching under Matt Rule, and that he had a lot of freedom to do what he wanted to do, and everything's set up for him there. So why go and be in a parallel change job to be a defensive coordinator somewhere else? He needed to get a good head coaching opportunity or he wasn't leaving.
There you go. And then the other big piece of Nebraska football related news is that Matt Rule was in quite a few headlines across the college football world because he made a comment about looking for a transfer quarterback. And he basically said to get a good one, you need $1 to $2 million in NIL money. Now, it's no secret that Nebraska is looking for a good transfer quarterback. As we mentioned on the last podcast, it's the biggest thing our team is currently lacking. But I did see some people online kind of taking Rule to task, just saying, oh, that number is overblown. We've seen no confirmed reports of quarterbacks making millions and that kind of thing. But what was your take on that statement?
Well, I would push back against people that say there isn't evidence that players are quarterbacks specifically aren't getting $1 million. I would say that there are a few examples of that have been basically confirmed. All this stuff is still very much under wraps because none of it is controlled by the universities, right? So they're all separate entities, and so there's a lot of dark stuff there. But the reason that I think it was appropriate for Coach Rule to maybe exaggerate a little bit is he didn't just bring that up. He was getting pounded with questions in the end of year press conference that he had by the local media, who obviously, their biggest subject was, we have a quarterback problem. What are you going to do to fix it? Clearly, you have to go to the portal because you can't go to high school and expect a high school kid to come in and immediately be your answer. So you need to get somebody who's already proven at the collegiate level that they can get the job done. So that after 3 or 4 questions basically centered around that, then he finally said, let's talk about the elephant in the room. And then he got into the conversation. So that's the context of where that comment came from. And then when he said the $1 to $2 million, that just tells you how much he really doesn't know exactly how much it's going to be, but it's going to be a lot. That, at the end of the day, that's the message you have to hear from him, is to get a top flight quarterback, you're going to have to commit a lot of your resources. And that is contrary to what he's wanting to accomplish with the NIL piece. His goal is that the NIL piece ultimately gives the broad spectrum of the players a good amount of compensation, if you will, through name, image, and likeness that allows all of them to live a pretty good college existence, right? And really raises their level of experience without creating all the infighting and possible, chemistry issues that could happen if you had one single, gunslinger that was getting $1.5 million. So hopefully that got conveyed. I think it was clear. But that doesn't mean that Nebraska isn't in the market, because we clearly are. We have to be.
Right. When I saw some Nebraska fans online saying that it was kind of his way of signaling to the boosters and the NIL collective folks that, hey, you guys need to step it up a bit. We haven't been as aggressive with that as other universities.
Correct. And you know what, Alex, that is being unfair to the boosters. The traditional booster structure at the University of Nebraska, they still need to be giving the big bucks to the university's athletic department to make sure that we can continue to build beautiful facilities. And we just announced basically a $500 million renovation of our football stadium, right? So that's where the booster money has to go. What Coach Rule's talking to is you and me. He's talking to average Nebraska fan. We're the ones that need to find a way to make some reasonably reasonable contribution, even if it's on a monthly basis of $25 or $50 or whatever. And if every Nebraska fan who is an avid fan that really wants to be committed to having Nebraska be successful going forward in this new era of NIL, the fact is, you and I should both be given some small amount of money to the NIL Collective 1890 every month, and if 50% of Nebraska fans were doing that, then that NIL would be flush with money.
Right. Well, I'm certainly not going to do a monthly payment, but I might consider a one-time thing.
Well, there you go. Well, whatever. But my point is that what they really need, because NIL has now become an expense. It's not a one-time, I'm going to contribute. I've given money on occasion at other times in my life for a project that I believed in, right? But that's a project that has a beginning and an end, and that's it. You're one time, boom, done. This is an expense line. This is an ongoing thing that will have to happen forever now in college sports. And because there's always going to be somebody else, a neighbor down the road that is going to be willing to give more. There's no end in sight to where this is going to go until either the whole thing collapses or there is some change in how laws are made. Because right now, I don't think you can put that genie back in the bottle.
Yes.
So we'll have to talk about that NIL thing on another occasion. That's a whole separate podcast that we can dive into.
It's a whole separate rant for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And then in terms of the Heisman Trophy, right, which is coming up next week, they announced the finalists, I believe today, actually, as we're recording this on Monday, December 4th. I think it was Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., and Marvin from Ohio State. They're
Harrison.
Right. Marvin Harrison, the really good wide receiver.
Yes, Marvin Harrison Jr.
And everyone seems to agree that Jaden Daniels from LSU, even though his team is 9-3, he himself has put up some crazy numbers this year, both rushing the ball and passing it. So he seems to be the Vegas favorite. But, Michael Penix Jr. is leading his Washington team into the playoff, as we'll discuss later. So maybe he could pull out an upset.
Right. Yep, that's possible. But again, that the Heisman has become a quarterback-centric award for the most part, and it's a glamour award, and it's based on stats and numbers, and not necessarily team success to the same degree that other awards might be.
Right. Yeah. Well, I of course, the one I always go back to is the year that Ndamukong Suh was nominated, because Nebraska wasn't one of the best teams, right? We were a 2-loss, 3-loss type team that year,
right?
But we played in. I think that was the year we played in the Big 12 the Big 12 championship game, I should say, and the guy who won it wasn't like some super stud quarterback, right? Right. I think that looking back in hindsight, most would agree that Ndamukong Suh definitely deserved it more.
Absolutely. But up to that point, there had been so few defensive players that had ever won it. I think you'd have to almost have gone back to the old days when a lot of players played both ways to find players that played a lot of defense and were most known for their defensive prowess that won the award. And then for literally decades, there were no defensive players who ever got the award. But then the outcry of Ndamukong Suh not getting the award then led to some other defensive players getting the award in the years that followed. So it did, I think, at least prepare the path so that another outstanding defensive player who had a phenomenal year could get a realistic shot at it, because most people agreed that Ndamukong should have gotten it.
There you go. All right. And then in terms of women's volleyball, the Huskers had their opening 2-round games against various teams for the NCAA tournament. Specifically, they played against Long Island University in Missouri. They won them both 3-0. In both cases, had some sets where they were quite dominant and others where they got a little too close for comfort. But the Huskers were playing sick. A lot of the players caught some sort of bug and could barely talk, on the interviews afterwards and things like that. So We're hoping that we use this time before Thursday's game to heal up and recover. And so we're in a better physical shape for a match against Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I just, I would hope and expect that they're being very disciplined about getting sleep, that they're, getting their, vitamin supplements and all the other things that all the nutritional support staff can do to work them through that process in as, effective a way as possible, because they're going to need it. Now, basically, you're now in the Sweet 16. There are no easy games. Every game we play from here on out is going to be against a team that maybe they don't have the individual accolade players that we do, because we've obviously gotten a lot of recognition being the number one team in the country. But the truth is that each one of these teams now is going to have, experienced a tremendous amount of success, and they know what it takes to win. And they all execute and are great teams. They play good team volleyball. That's one of the reasons I love that sport so much, is there's so much teamwork that goes into being an effective volleyball team. And so we better bring our A game, and we can't sleepwalk through sets like we've tended to do through parts of this season and even in the first 2 games of this tournament. So I'm hoping to see a very focused and intense volleyball team for this coming weekend. Otherwise, we won't get out of this weekend successfully, and we will be going to the Final Four. So, and you know what else needs to happen? The Nebraska fans got to get off their damn butts, because I'm here to tell you right now that the fan, although we filled the arena like we always do, we had a bunch of blue hairs sitting on their hands in these first 2 rounds. That was not at all a supportive, pro Nebraska environment in there.
I did not watch the first game live. I think I listened to maybe a little bit of the radio, but I did watch part of the second game live.
The Missouri game?
The Missouri game, yeah. And I remember the commentators specifically mentioned like the crowd getting loud, and it seemed like it wasn't anything above and beyond, but it was, reasonably loud, I thought.
Yeah, it was. Well, you got 9,000 people there. Nebraska has one of the biggest stadiums in the country. So, yeah, it's going to be loud, but it needs to be, like no sit this Thursday. You don't sit down. You go into that arena and you're doing Go Big Red chants, and you're doing Husker Power, and you're making that place rock. Because unlike a normal regular season game, which is governed by the Nebraska organization, these games are actually run by the NCAA. And so there are different rules. All of our introductions, our big video production that we do before the game that usually gets the crowd and the team all hyped up, can't do that. They're not allowing that, right? You can't have DJ music, in the loud environment, and do our traditional songs that we usually do. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've listened to some of the other spots around the country. They're ignoring those rules. You're not supposed to do it, but some of them did it anyway, and obviously are not getting punished for it. But Nebraska is a rule follower. They don't do that stuff. So, we have our Red Kingdom song and all that sort of stuff. We don't do any of that stuff. Now Missouri's band was there along with our band. So we had to even share bands because it's an NCAA tournament game. It's not a Nebraska game.
Right. Well, that at least I understand. My guess is with those other teams, they'll probably get fined, but maybe they're just willing to eat the fine because it's not that big,
That could be. I don't know. I don't know what the rules or the enforcement policy is with regard to those rules, but it's frustrating to me because and what it means is Nebraska's fan base, the actual voices, the mouths of Nebraska fans, have got to elevate.
Right.
They've got to rise to the occasion, or we're not getting out of this weekend. Yeah. I'm very concerned. I'm not sure we're going to get out of there.
Right. Well, talking about Georgia Tech real quick, they actually made an upset. They were a 5 seed going up against number 4 Florida, and they won in a barn burner 5-set match, which had a lot of close sets, like 22-25, 30-28. 16-14 in the final. So their players have to be tired, and obviously they have time to recover here, but they had a much harder journey to get to this point than we have. So I think that's one cap in our favor.
Right. Well, that would be an issue. That would be a real issue if that was the first game of back-to-back games. Right? Like if we were playing Georgia Tech the night after, or even 2 days after they had a big 5-setter like that. But when you have basically the better part of a week to recover, then the recovery aspect, the athletic recovery aspect is mature enough at these major universities with all the resources they have that those girls are going to have recovered from the physicality of that one event. But it does indicate that Georgia Tech is a team that has got great grit, right? They just refuse to die. They refuse to because they were playing at Florida. They were not the host, and they were playing in Florida's gym against the number 4 seed Florida, and they found a way. So they're going to be very scrappy, which Nebraska prides itself on being very scrappy and a great defense. So it should be a barn burner type of match that we get to see on Thursday. Right. I'm excited to see it, but I tell you, it's not a foregone conclusion at all. No more. There are no easy games left. Every team we play is very much capable of beating us, and so every one I'm going to be on pins and needles. It's going to be exciting though.
Yep. Yeah, well, I'm feeling pretty good that we'll beat Georgia Tech maybe in say 4 sets, but the following game, which will be on Saturday,
Right.
which will be the winner of Arkansas and Kentucky, that one I'm a little more concerned about because I know you said that although we beat Kentucky earlier this year, they're a much better team now, and they've I believe 3-0'd both teams they've played so far. So if they win,
and not just 3-0'd, Alex, they crushed the two teams they played. I mean, they dominated them like annihilation type domination. So Kentucky is playing at very low error. They are just a finely oiled machine right now, and we are not. We're not as efficient as we were earlier in the year.
well, yeah, and right, and it's hard to look at these two games and be able to say, okay, what's us genuinely making mistakes and what's the girls being a little off their game because they're sick, right?
Right. Exactly. That is true.
So yeah, let's hope that they're mostly over that and that they're able to bring their A game against Kentucky if they beat Arkansas, because I think they'll need it.
Yep. And John Cook is one of the greatest coaches of all time, and he does an excellent job of preparing his team generally for tournament matches. He's always done a good job of gearing up, his staff's preparation for game planning against other opponents. Stuff has historically been very good. We'll see how he does this year, but I think that they're going to do quite well in terms of their preparation. But they still have to execute, and with all the freshmen that we have that play significant minutes, that's a little bit of a question. What kind of performance we're going to see?
Very true. All right.
Hey, I do want to mention just one more thing. I sent a little note to you. Now, people might wonder why are you and I talking about volleyball on the football podcast, right? And the answer is because I have grown up with that, and as a point of recognition, Sharon Zavala, who was the coach at my high school when I attended school back in the 70s and early 80s, who also coached my older sisters in volleyball in the 70s, just retired at the end of this volleyball season and was announced today. She's Sharon Zavala is her name, and she won almost just short of 1,200 games in her career, and in the 50 plus years that she was a coach at Grand Island Central Catholic, she won 11 state championships and was a runner-up in 9 state championships. So basically 20 championship appearances in 50 years.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And to stay with one school for 50 years like that's pretty rare.
Yeah, it is. She was just an amazing coach, and just little school. You normally are going to have ebbs and flows. Years where you just don't have any talent, and she found a way to build a program there where she just had a continuous flow of excellent players.
All right, very cool. So now we're switching to the national football discussion, and specifically the conference championship games from this past week. It was fun to watch. I got to see, I'll admit, I didn't watch the Texas-Oklahoma State one because I looked at the score and it was pretty over pretty early on.
Yeah, it got ugly quick.
But I watched the other 4. And the first one we got to see was Washington versus Oregon. We gave a prediction on the previous podcast. I said that Washington would win 42-38, while you went reverse with Oregon winning 42-38. And the final score ended up being Washington 34, Oregon 31. So we were right that it was a close game, but it went Washington's way again because they beat Oregon the previous time earlier in the season. But despite that, I believe Oregon was like 9-point favorites. Everyone was saying that Oregon was playing the better football late in the season and that, they looked better on the eye test. But Washington came out and pretty much dominated the whole first half, with the exception of a drive that they gave up to Oregon late in the first half. Other than that, they pretty much controlled that whole section of the game.
I would agree, and I would agree with the pundits before the game. I genuinely thought that Oregon was the better team, and especially since it was at a neutral site, it was in Vegas. I thought that would also play to Oregon's advantage. and it didn't.
Yeah.
Bottom line, it didn't.
Yeah.
And some again, they just they had some success, but they could just never sustain their success. Oregon, I mean, where
Right.
Washington did.
Right. Well, it did end up going to be a bit back and forth because it was 20 to
Mm,
10 at halftime, which does not
right,
reflect how dominant that half was for Washington because they had to settle for some field goals. And then
right.
Oregon went on a great streak in the third quarter and actually went up
Mhm.
24 to 20. So
Yes.
kept Washington scoreless and looking like they were going to take control. But then Washington kind of bounced back in the fourth quarter and
Yep.
managed to run out the clock right and win the game. So it was another good one. Both
It
both
was.
both matchups between these two teams have been a lot of fun to watch.
Yep. And they even though the scores have been high, their defenses were making very good defensive plays as well. It wasn't like it was all offense.
Right.
So they're balanced football teams.
Yes. Though I will say Oregon definitely gave up some like huge passes to Washington at certain
Oh
moments.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Another one which we mentioned right was Texas versus Oklahoma State. We both predicted that Texas would win. I said 38 to 31, while you said 48 to 31. Ended up being 49 to 21. So both of us were being a bit conservative with the score line there.
The margin of victory, yeah.
Yeah, and I watched the recap of that game afterwards. Uh, they just had a bunch of issues. Texas was able to pass for 600 plus yards and had double the time of possession that Oklahoma State did. And then Oklahoma State turned it over twice, while Texas turned it over once. So yeah, it became clear it was going to be a score fest. It was like 21-7, pretty early on. And yeah,
Hmm.
Texas kept that lead pretty much the whole way.
Right. Well, and Texas was dominant. I mean, if they could have their offense function at that high of a level, then they are going to make for a very interesting game. As they move forward in the playoffs. So
And then of course we've got Georgia and Alabama, the SEC matchup. I predicted on the previous podcast that Georgia would win 42 to 34, while you predicted that Georgia would win 31-21, so a little bit lower scoring. And then the final score ended up being 27-24 Alabama. So you were closer in terms of the score margin, but going the opposite way, which of course,
yeah,
made us upset and turned out to be a harbinger of things to come. But
right.
but you got to give Alabama credit. They came in with a great game plan, and their
They did.
offensive line to me was the real game changer because it felt like their quarterback had all day. Even when Georgia tried to blitz, they would pick it up, and they were also able to allow Alabama to get a running game going.
Right.
So that was what really impressed me about Alabama's performance.
Well, and I would say also their defense, man, when whenever Georgia tried to run laterally, like to get out and around Alabama's defense, they had a couple of plays that were successful that way, but not very many. And Alabama would just string them out and they'd meet them at the line of scrimmage. Man, it was just amazing. Their corners were so aggressive and just were flying to the football.
Yep. And Georgia went up first, 7-0, like 3-and-out at Alabama twice, but then Alabama got going, went up 17-7 by halftime. And I believe that included a missed field goal by Georgia, 50 yards, right, which ended up being a 3-point game. So that was a significant miss on their part. Uh,
Yeah.
and then it came down to Georgia scored. It was 27-24 with 3 minutes left on the clock. Georgia had 2 timeouts, and they chose to squib kick it, basically, and instead of doing an onside kick, and trust their defense basically to stop Alabama. But just the previous drive, Alabama had a drive down the field and scored themselves. So my thought was, if I was Kirby Smart, I would have gone for the onside kick, if you had confidence in that, right? Obviously, if you've practiced it, and it was like always going wrong, then maybe you don't. But if you've got confidence in your ability to do it, then I think you've got to try and go for the win, because I was not feeling confident in their defense at that point.
Right, right. Well, and like say, you don't know. Maybe he had seen enough of their because they practice onside kicks. I guarantee you, quite regularly, and he must have not had a high degree of confidence that his kicker was going to be able to, execute it to a reasonably good degree. So he decided that that was the better strategy. But based on how the game had played out, it didn't seem very likely that they were going to be able to stop Alabama and get the ball back, given the circumstance.
Yeah. So that's how that one played out. And then we had Michigan versus Iowa, which we were quite confident about. I predicted that Michigan would win 31-10. Well, you predicted that that Michigan would win 35-9. Ended up being lower scoring in both regards, in that Michigan only scored 26 points, but Iowa came away with a big fat 0.
Exactly. So my total margin was pretty close. It's just that I thought Iowa would score a little bit, and that Michigan would then be compelled to score a little more. Michigan was able to, frankly, be fairly conservative in its decisions in terms of its offensive play calling and stuff, because Iowa was so inept on offense. They really didn't threaten very much.
Well, I would say that became true in the fourth quarter, but up till that point, I think Michigan was genuinely trying to score, and Iowa was stopping them. Michigan only had 213 total yards of offense, and Iowa got 3 sacks on their quarterback.
Right.
And when you look at the play-by-play, Iowa only gave up one drive that was like a little bit long. That was a 52-yard drive of Michigan's that led to a field goal. Every other drive, they kept them to 30 yards or less, which a lot of those cases were because their offense either turned the ball over or went for on fourth down, didn't get it, and left Michigan with great field position. So,
well, and that's my point though, is once Michigan got up about 17-0, they're like, okay, they were feeling pretty good about their confidence that they were going to be able to win the football game. Right. And at that point, they started to shift into low gear, so to speak, to run some clock. And they weren't trying to run up the score per se. Although I don't love Michigan's offensive coordinator and how they called plays throughout the course of that game. I thought they actually threw it more than they should have. But regardless, they were able to just basically grind it out, and ultimately Iowa never scored.
Well, and don't forget, it was 10-0 at halftime, and the only touchdown Michigan had was an 87-yard punt return, right? The guy didn't get all the way, but he got close enough, and they quickly scored after that. So it was, if Iowa had any kind of a pulse on offense, it would have been a good game, but they didn't.
I agree. Iowa makes everyone ugly. And Michigan had to play ugly, because that's what Iowa makes you do, basically. And they make a bunch of first downs barely, and just keep the clock and eat the clock and eat the clock and shorten the game. And that's what they do to everybody. Yeah. Even Michigan.
Yep. And then the other kind of ugly game we had to watch at the end was the ACC championship with Florida State and Louisville. I predicted that Florida State would win 30-20. While you predicted that Louisville would win 42-28. And it ended up being quite a bit lower scoring, with Florida State winning 16-6. I want to say the over-under for that game was like 50 points, so they beat it by like 30.
Yeah, well, like the odds makers in Vegas, I thought there would be a lot more scoring, particularly from Louisville, because Louisville had been fairly prolific on offense throughout the course of the season. I'm very impressed with Florida State's defense being able to do what they did.
Yes. Well, and it should be stated that when we recorded last week, we weren't aware yet of kind of the rumors circulating that Florida State's second team quarterback was going through a concussion protocol and might not be available for that game. That kind of came out later. And so, as it turns out, they had their third string quarterback, Brock Glenn, who's a freshman, in as quarterback. So I think they said that he had played in like one of their earlier games, right? Probably late when the score was already well decided. But to have to start a freshman, with all this pressure of the ACC championship and getting to the college football playoff, it would have been a great, kind of unpredictable or unlikely story had he played well. And unfortunately, he did not. He threw it 21 times, only completed it 8 times for 55 yards, and they ended up running in the Wildcat more often than not later on in the game.
Right. But they won the game.
They did. Because Louisville was 14 of 36 throwing it for only 111 yards.
Right, which probably was their lowest total of the season.
Yes. So
I don't know that for a fact, but I bet it was.
FSU's defense did a great job. It was actually 3-0 FSU at halftime, so an exhilarating score. And FSU missed a 45-yard field goal somewhere in there. But, as we say, right, it's not just about the quarterback. It's about the whole team, and the whole team came together and managed to win ugly, with a great defensive performance. And then, a few great moments by, their running backs and other players on the offense kind of helped, this freshman quarterback get through that situation.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
exactly. So then basically Alabama was the unexpected, right?
Yes.
But Texas won as expected. Michigan won as expected. Florida State won as expected. And Washington, like you say, was not the favorite going into that game, but they were the more highly ranked team. They actually were, right? They were higher ranked. They were one of the 4. Right. They were undefeated, and they were one of the 4, even though, the odds makers placed Oregon as the favorite for the actual game. So I guess you can't call Washington winning an upset based on rankings.
Yes, that's true. And I would just like to point out that of the 5 games, I predicted 4 of them correctly, minus the SEC game, and you predicted 2 of them correctly. So I went out on that one this time.
Yeah. Well, that's because I was recall that I went out on a limb. I went against the grain on the Washington pick.
No. You went with the grain on the Oregon pick. The Oregon was the favorite.
You're right.
Louisville, I'll give you credit. That was your long shot.
I was swinging. I was swinging for the fence there, and I picked Michigan as you did. So that was the same. And then we both picked Georgia.
Well, no. We both picked Georgia, and we were both wrong about that, but we both picked Texas, which was correct.
Right. Huh. So when we're really looking at this Florida State Louisville game, the thing is that it wasn't a pretty game. In fact, I expected it to be a lot higher scoring, obviously, based on our predictions. But the bottom line is Florida State found a way. They found a way to win. Their defense rose to the occasion. Their defense is outstanding. And it's just crazy that a team that, accomplishes all that, ends up getting treated the way they are, in this playoff selection process. And, we're going to have to address that separately because I'm ready to go on a rant.
One of Dad's historic rants. Yes, as I was obviously unimpressed by their performance of their offense, right? It was, kind of an ugly thing to watch as the night progressed. But, the point is that they managed to do better than their opponent in that game, who was, their conference opponent, in the conference championship game, and they got out of there with a W. We as Nebraska fans know a thing or two about ugly wins, right? A win's a win, as they say.
Exactly.
So yes, what happened was a total travesty, and we'll be going into that on the next episode because it's a rant of epic proportions that deserves its own full segment of College Football Throwdown. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can also find us online if you search for College Football Throwdown on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can leave us a rating or review there. We always love hearing from the fans. So thank you out there for listening to today's episode, and thank you, Dad, for joining me. And until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.